Hello and welcome to another BlenderWiz video tutorial. In this tutorial, I will be showing you how to create the image in front of you by using Python scripting in Blender. So this tutorial will be covering a brief introduction to Python, how to use Python in Blender, a little bit on Python documentation and the Blender API, and also the Blender scripting viewport. Start by opening up a new scene in Blender, switch from the default window to the scripting window. So there are four main windows or components in the scripting window. This top bar here shows methods that we have called and the parameters that are used. This side box here is the text editor where we actually write the script, and once you write the script, a run script button will show up here, and so we can execute it. Then we have the 3D viewport, which allows us to see the output of our scripts. And then finally, in the bottom, we have the console. This is where we can test parts of our script without actually executing the whole thing. This is actually quite useful for instances where you don't quite know the syntax or something that you're not sure how to use. I'm going to give a very quick intro to Python here. If you are interested, there are plenty of other tutorials out there that can give you a lot more information on how to use it. So Python is a wonderful language that is very lenient on syntax. It makes coding easy and enjoyable most of the time. It is an interpreted language, and therefore it tends to be a bit slower than compiled languages such as C or Java. It is whitespace sensitive, so make sure to check that all of your spaces and tabs are accounted for. Just like nearly every other modern language, there are pre-existing libraries that already have a lot of functions and methods for you to call. To call on these libraries, you need to import them first using the import statement. So I'm just going to open up a new text data block. I'm going to call it cube generator, because that is what we will be using it for later. So when I start typing, notice that the text is a light blue, but when I finish the import statement, it turns purple. And this just shows that Blender is recognizing that this is a statement. So I'm going to get rid of that now. Next, we have variables. Variables store information for later usage. In many languages, you have to specify what kind of information will be stored in each variable, with statements such as int for integer, so 1, 2, 3, float or double for values with decimal points, so 1.0, 2.5, 3.956, etc., and Boolean for true or false statements, and string for text. Python is actually able to detect what kind of information you are storing in each variable automatically, so you don't actually have to specify this. Just type in the variable name and set it equal to some value. So I'm going to demonstrate this down in the console here. So say x is equal to 1, y is equal to 2, z is equal to x plus y, and now if we look at what each variable is called, so if I just hit x, it's equal to 1, y is equal to 2, z is equal to 3. So we won't be covering this next part in this tutorial, but Python does support functional programming and object-oriented programming. Our script is actually simple enough that we are not going to be creating any separate functions, and everything will be running in the main body of the program. If you want to continue learning about Python, I will be posting links to the Python documentation, the Blender API, and the page where the specific functions that we are using can be found. The best thing to do before just digging straight in is to plan out how we're going to tackle the problem. We're trying to create a grid of rectangular prisms with random heights. We need to know the dimensions of this grid, so it would be a good idea to be creating two variables here, a width and a length. in my final render, I set the width to 20 and the length to 18. Next, we're going to need to assign a random height to these elements in our grid. So we're going to need some way of getting a random number, specifically a random integer, in here. So the easiest way to assign these random heights is to use a solidify modifier on a plane. So instead of creating cubes, we should be creating a grid of planes and then setting a solidify modifier to it. The solidify modifier is also a good idea because we can give it a thickness value without too much difficulty. Another method of getting the same result would be having the program tab into edit mode, select the bottom 4 vertices of that cube, and then scaling the cube along the z-axis however far we want. But that is kind of tedious. So anyway, pulling up the Python documentation here, there is a random library. So it's called random. And inside of it, it includes this method here that is called randRange, which we give it a number, where to stop, and it will spit out a random number inside of the range. Also, pulling that away, since we are working with Blender, we have to import the BPY Blender Python library. So anyway, let's get these imports in here. So import random and import BPY. So the Blender Python library, the BPY, gives us access to all this stuff in the Blender API. So this will allow us to import primitive objects, set modifiers, and work with everything else that Blender has to offer. So we should be pretty close to being able to program this script. So let's test a few things before we get going. Let's begin with the randRange function found in random. So coming down to the console here, let's type in import random, and if everything's correct, you will get no errors. If you mistyped, it'll say you screwed up. So import ran, say you screwed up, and it'll tell you no module, and just retype it and you should be good to go. This will import the random library into your current workspace. Next, we want to use the randRange function, which takes an exclusive range. This means that it will stop before the number that is given to it. So if you want a random number between 0 and 10, we need to type in random.randRange 11. So try that out a few times. I'm getting mostly 2, but yeah, spits out a bunch of random numbers. Anyway, next, let's try creating a primitive plane object. Now, the Blender console has already imported the BPY library, so we don't have to type in import BPY. So let's go over to the Blender documentation, and where is that? We are looking for plane. There we go. So this is the function that we need to call in order to add a plane. Now if you look here, all of its parameters are optional. This means that they all have these default values. This is nice. It means that a programmer actually went through and assigned stuff, so we can just test this function straight off the bat. So let's give that a go. So if we type bpy.ops, bpy. And then if you hit Control and space, you can actually have it autocomplete. So bpy ops mesh dot primitive plane add, and then if we just close that parenthesis and hit add, we've created a new plane. So those both work. Let's delete this cube and plane. Also notice up here that as we do stuff, we are starting to see all the functions that we've called along with the parameters. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, so we have imported the random library, the BPY library, and we've created two variables. Now we need to use this width and length to generate the grid. So we're going to need a for loop here. And this kind of loop will take an empty variable and a non-empty variable and increment the empty variable until it reaches the value of the non-empty variable. So for example, if we type for w in range width colon, it will take this empty variable w and increment it 1, 2, 3, 4 until it hits this value of width. Pretty cool. Now let's have it create a plane in a row. So what we're going to want is bpy.ops. Make sure you have tabbed in. So tab bpy ops dot mesh dot primitive plane add, and let's just go in and give it a parameter. So location is equal to, and it goes x, y, and z. So since it's all going to be flat, let's just set z to 0 and y to 0, and then for the x, do w times 2. Okay, let's save that. Now we're doing 2 because technically the width of the plane is 2 Blender units across. So to prevent overlapping, we need to multiply the width of the grid by the width of the object. So let's go ahead and try this out. It fails. Why does it fail? Let's just copy this, plop it right in. Okay, try that out. So that worked. Let's delete all of them and do location. So width times 2, 2, 0, 0. Let's just try that again. There we go. And now we have a nice row of planes. There should be 20 of them. 0 through 19, that makes 20. Let's go ahead and delete those now. So next, let's go ahead and finish the grid by adding another for loop, this time with the length instead of the width. So tab this plane adding thing in once more, create a new for loop. So for L in range length, and then we'll just do length, or L, times 2. And if we give this a quick run, we now have a nice grid. So note that if you don't want this width and length to be too high, because you can cause Blender to crash fairly easily. It's very easy to make an absolutely humongous grid, and of course if your computer doesn't have the memory required to handle all of the objects, it will crash. And so we're at 360 faces, so we should be okay for now. Now that we are able to create the plane objects, we need to apply modifiers to them. For this, we are going to create a new loop in the main block. This loop is going to cycle through all of the objects in the scene, and then test if they are a mesh type. And from there, if they are, it will create a solidify modifier. So let's go ahead and create this loop now. Just go back to the main block, and to cycle through all of the objects, type for obj in bpy.data.objects colon, and then so this will cycle through and return an object, and then we need to we need an if statement. So if obj.type is equal to mesh, so this will only select meshes because technically the lamp and the camera are both objects, and we can't apply solidify modifiers to them, so it would make no sense to try. So now we need to assign the solidify modifier itself. Now it seems to have disappeared from the API, so I'm not really sure where it went, and I'm not sure how long it's going to last, but I used obj.modifiers.new, and then the name, so solidify. We could call that one Bob, but that wouldn't make any sense. And then this part is what modifier we're adding, so solidify. And if I spelled everything correctly, when we go to hit run, these objects will now have a solidify modifier put on them. So let's go ahead and call this one Bob, just so that you can see how that works out. So delete all of these. And then if we run that, we have Bob. Bob, Bob, Bob. But yeah, there's solidify. Okay. I don't know if you noticed, but the normals are actually flipped. Here, let's go ahead and run that again. So if I tab into edit mode here, and we go and take a look at the normals, well, yeah, the normals are flipped from how we want them. So when we increase this solidify, it actually goes down, which is not what we want. So let's go ahead and delete all of these. Not the light. So many objects. Okay, let's delete those. I'm actually going to go ahead and move these, the camera and the light, to the second layer, or to another layer. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to go in and flip the normal. Let's do that up here right after we import the plane. So go and type bpy.ops. bpy.ops.object.edit mode toggle, and then parentheses, and then once you do that, bpy.ops.mesh.flip normals. And then, since we want to get back out of edit mode, we just copy and paste the toggle again. And that should be good. Cool. So if we run that now, and it runs properly. Oops, where is it? If we change the thickness, it should be facing up. And it is. So let's delete all of those. Now we need to be able to assign the height. So that will be in our second loop. And we're going to use the random number now. So let's go ahead and create a new variable called rand number, and let's just set that to random dot rand range 2, so that way it's either a 0 or a 1. And now we're going to use an if statement. So if rand number is equal to 1, we're going to do obj dot, I believe it's obj dot modifiers solidify, so it's this name here, solidify dot thickness, so that's the property that we're editing, and let's just make this one tall. So I'm going to do 2 plus rand range 2. So this means that the maximum thickness that this block can be is 3, and the minimum is 2. So it gives it a floor of 2. And then else, that doesn't require any other sort of input. We could do an elif, and then we'd have to do rand number equal 0. Let's just do that for now. Obj dot modifiers, it's pretty much the same as this, so I'm just going to copy and paste that to speed things along. And I'm just going to set that to 1. Cool. Okay, let's give this a quick run. Something failed. Why did it fail? So rand number, interesting. Rand range, let's see, random dot rand range 2. Oh, did I forget to capitalize? Maybe. Rand range. Interesting. I forgot the random part in front, so it should be random dot rand range. Let's try running that again and see if it works. No. Random dot rand range. That's supposed to be lowercase. There. So it's either 3 or it's 0. That's not right. Let's just do because right there, that's not an assigned variable. Got to make sure that everything is spelled correctly. There we go. That's more like it. So now we have this kind of cool terrain thing going on. Yeah, but I feel like it's too blocky. I in my final render, I actually had it a bit smoother. So I had kind of a weighting system. So basically how that worked is instead of having a 50-50 chance of either having a tall block or a short block, I actually put this out of 11. So anywhere from 0, actually out of 10, so from 0 to 9. And if the random number is, let's see, I think it's greater than 7, not 71, then it would do that. Otherwise, it would do the other one. And what this did is it kind of limited the number of tall blocks, and it increased the number of short blocks. And I mean, you can play around with this number, and lower numbers, or numbers that are closer to 5, will give you more of an even. So this would be about 50-50. That's 70% chance of having or not having a tall block. Anyway, yeah, you get the point. Fairly simple. Finally, I want to add one more modifier. So, yeah, I'm just gonna copy this one, put that right in like so. I'm gonna call this bevel. Change this type from solidified to bevel. Let's delete all of these ones. Run the script again. And now all of our meshes have a nice bevel on them. In this next section, we will be setting up the materials and the lighting. So let's go ahead back over into the default and get the lighting all worked out. So come back over into this layer, bring our light and our camera back into the main view. Let's just bring this whole thing over, kind of center it up a bit. Something like that should be good enough. Move this guy over, clear the rotation, rotate the X by, I don't know, 90 for now, and rotate. Now, somehow the proportional editing got turned on. Don't know how that happened. And there. Now, if you want to make this a Facebook size thing, I forget how big it is. Something like 851 by, I don't know, 315. Yeah, that looks about right. So if you're making a Facebook cover, that would be good. Okay, I'm gonna make the lens a little different. Now also, let's go ahead and give this depth of field, so turn on the limits. What is this cube plane? So this is plane number 164. So let's just set the limit to that, like so. Let's turn it from aperture, or the radius, to f-stop. I don't know, something low, like 2 should be good. If we give this a quick render. Yeah, good enough. Now I'm going to set up a new window. So click new. I'm going to call this materials, just like before. Oops, that's a little small. Let's go ahead and split the screen. Rendered. There, like that. Okay. So now I'm just going to take this lamp, pull it back, turn it to a sun lamp, rotate it around, rotate it to be facing the camera, like so. I like that. Okay. There, let's just set that to being a node editor. There we go. Okay. So, just like in the main image, or the original, this is going to be mostly orange with a few scattered blue tiles. So I'm just going to select a random tile here. Let's go with that guy there and give it a new material. I'm going to call it orange glass, and we're going to create it. So delete the diffuse. It's a fairly simple shader to create, actually. And while I call it glass, oh, no, that's why it wasn't working. We want a mix shader. So yeah, we're going to use refraction and a glossy shader. Okay, And that is how I create my glass now. I like it because I have a lot more control over how it reacts. You can also change the colors and have fun with that. So I'm just going to set this to a nice orange color. Also, set the world to white. Now, let's go ahead. Everything outside of the camera should get deleted. So go into camera view mode, or at least delete as much as you can. That way your computer doesn't render what's outside too much. There. And that should help speed things up a bit. So take all of the objects, except for the one that you have, then hit Control L, set all materials. I don't know, I think you have to disconnect and then reconnect, and then Blender will figure it out. So there we go. We have a nice orange glassy shader going on here. I'm actually going to bring this down a tiny bit. That way we aren't getting this edge in the back and it looks like it might be an infinite plane. And I'm actually going to go ahead and create a blue color just to change things up a bit. So blue glass. And really, this is just as simple as changing the color on that refraction. So that looks good. I like it. So we should be pretty much good to go. I don't know, I'd play with the f-stop value a little bit more. Turn that down. I want it fairly blurry outside of that image. That way, when we go to put the bokeh blur on, it looks good. I don't feel that compositing the scene is completely necessary, but I did it just for fun and to make a nice blur around the kind of bright sections and the edges. And this will just help pull your eyes into the middle and notice little details. So I used an ellipse mask, which plugs into the blur node, or into a blur node. So let's go ahead and grab that from matte, ellipse mask. Let's plug this guy in. I'm gonna duplicate that viewer. I don't think I did that right. Should be in value. Or not. There we go. That's what I'm wanting. Let's make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to rotate it because I want to cover the blue guy here and the middle. So let's just turn up the width, the height a little bit. That should be good. Okay, now let's go ahead and grab the blur. Set it to fast Gaussian. Check relative, and let's just blur it a little bit, like so. I actually kind of want to turn up the contrast a little. We should probably hook up the output first though, so we can actually see what we're doing. So go color mix. Let's plug that one in there. We are going to plug the factor into the top there. As you can see, it's already starting to well, I think this is flipped. There we go, because we want this middle to be the clear part. And then let's go down, grab a bokeh blur. There we go. That's already looking pretty nice. So I don't know if we need the contrast that much, but let's just see how it looks. So let's go grab a color ramp, or RGB curves, sorry. We can play with that. Darken up the darks. lighten up the lights, but not too much. That just looks silly. Nah, I don't like it. Okay, and what I'm also going to do is duplicate this mix node here and turn this down a bit. There. That looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit more. Okay. So that is looking pretty good. And there goes an ambulance. Okay, I want a little bit more blur. Something right like that. This is how your final render should look. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you want to see more, please feel free to subscribe. Also give comments and feedback in the comment section below. Thank you for watching.